Dr. Kendall, welcome to our interview today. I understand that you recently celebrated your 90th birthday.
I did indeed. July 13th, I was 2025. I was born 19. Sorry, I was born July 13th, 1935. I am now 90. Louise is 85. She'll be 86 uh, next month.
I
She
think you
doesn't
had
like
a
me to tell that, but
celebration
I
at
do.
Times Square Church. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, they surprised me. Um, I preached there, as you probably know, a lot. And when after, I was going to go out to lunch or to dinner with somebody after the service, and as I headed toward there, they stopped me, said, "No, come this way." And I said, "What's going on?" "Just follow me." So I go in, and there's the room with Tim, his wife, and the elders of Times Square Church. And even Carter Conlon, who's the former minister, had driven from Pennsylvania just to be there for that. And I was so touched by that. Yes, so that was, well, I had one other celebration. On my actual birthday, July 13th, I preached at the First Baptist Church in Pasadena, Texas. And, uh, and they were very good to me too. But thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. On our podcast, we talk about people's life changes, where people make a change in the direction of their life. And I thought of you in particular. You have changed theologies in your lifetime from maybe an Arminian perspective to a Calvinist perspective. You've changed from pastoring in the US to pastoring in Europe, and then you've changed to being an author. And I'm interested in these times of your life when you were making changes.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I don't think anybody has ever put it that way before. I hadn't thought of it, but that's true. The,
When you began pastoring, was it the call of God? How did you determine what I'm calling that first curve?
well, it's so complex. We won't even get past the first. See, in December the 2nd, 1954, I preached my first sermon.
Really?
Ju- Just a week before, I felt called to preach. I won't go into the details unless you want me to. But the Greek professor at Trevecca Nazarene College, where I was a student, uh, heard that I had decided I'd be a preacher, and he said, "I want you to preach your first sermon in my church next Wednesday night." So I did. I preached a sermon on the faithfulness of God, and from Lamentations, "Great is thy faithfulness." And the sermon lasted 18 minutes. I did all I could do in 18 minutes. But 3 months later, while I'm a student at Trevecca, I'm offered to be the pastor of a church in Palmer, Tennessee. That's a little town in the mountains north of Chattanooga, near Monteagle, Tracy City. And so I accepted the pastorate. My grandmother, back in Ashland, Kentucky, bought me a brand new 1955 Chevrolet to drive in order to get to the church. In other words, I couldn't do it from Trevecca, so she bought me this car. So on Friday evenings, I would drive to Palmer, be there Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday night and come back Monday morning. Sometimes I'd come back Sunday night. But I was a student during the week and pastor on weekends. So I was there as a student. Uh, so it was in the Church of the Nazarene. That's my background.
Yeah. And was that a joyful part of your life? Was that something that was rewarding?
I would say yes, yes. Uh, I was a novice. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did my best. But I think maybe it would be appropriate to tell you that on one Monday morning, driving back from Tennessee, was in Tennessee, from Palmer to Nashville. Usually I'd come back on Sunday nights, but for some reason I came back on a Monday morning, and something happened to me that was, to say life changing will be the greatest understatement. You have no idea. Uh, I remember driving down on old US 41 down from Mont Eagle, Tennessee, and going down the mountain. And when we got to the surface, it was going straight. I began to pray. Normally, I would listen to the radio all the way home, all the way back to Nashville. But I turned off the radio and I felt like I should pray all the way to Nashville, which would be hour and a half, 2 hour drive. And I felt a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. And I was in agony before I knew it. And I cried out, Lord, what's wrong? What's going on? Where are you? Am I not saved? Am I not sanctified? I was using language of a Nazarene. We believed in two works of grace. You get saved and sanctified. When all of a sudden, while I'm driving to my right, it's kind of, it was, I could feel it to my right, was Jesus. He was more real to me than you are right now.
Wow.
And he was at the right hand of God the Father praying for me. He was interceding for me. I never felt so loved in all my life. And the next thing I remember, which would be an hour or so, hour and a half later, I heard Jesus say to the Father these words. He wants it. I heard the voice of the Father reply, He can have it. And in that second, a warmth came into my chest. It was even physical. I mean, I could feel warmth in my chest. And I immediately thought of John Wesley, who described at Aldersgate Street, he said, my heart was strangely warmed. I thought, I wonder if this is what happened to John Wesley.
Mm.
And the next thing I knew, I'm at Trevecca, I'm in the parking lot. I get out of the car, go to my dormitory, I shave. Then my first class is at 8 o'clock. And all day long, I kept asking, what was that? Well, my closest friend, his name was Bill Kearns. He's still alive. He's 91, and he's living in Virginia. We talk once in a while. He's still alive. He came running across the campus and came to my room and said, "What's happened to you?" I said, "Well, something has happened." He said, "I know. I can tell." He said, "What is it?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know." Uh, I said, "I only know one thing. I'm saved." He said, "Well, that's a strange comment. Of course you're saved." He said, "No." I said, "Bill, this is altogether different. I am eternally saved." "What do you mean?" I said, "I cannot be lost. I don't care what I do. I will go to heaven one day. I've been there today, and I'll go back." He said, "Well, you'll change your mind on that." I said, "I bet I don't. I never have." There's no way to exaggerate how real it was, but there's more. Before the end of the day, my theology went through a big change. I began to see the sovereign work of the Holy Spirit. I began to see it was, you could say, the embryonic phase of understanding predestination, not only eternal security, but I see that God chose me from the foundation of the world. And the next day, all I could think of is this in the Bible? I wonder if the Apostle Paul believed this. Well, I thought, of course he did. Maybe I'm the first since Paul to believe this. I mean, it was so real to me. Some weeks later, I become the assistant to the dean of religion at Trevecca. And I told him about all this. He said, RT, you're going off into Calvinism. I said, what's that? Well, he said, we don't believe that. I said, well, then we're wrong. Oh, RT, don't say that. Don't leave the church. I said, I'm not planning to leave the church. And then I quoted a verse in Romans 9, verse 15, where God said to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. He said, give me some time on that. I said, are you telling me you don't know what that means? He said, give me some time on that. You know what? 50 years later, he still didn't know what that meant. But I knew then. I knew then. And eventually I did leave the Church of the Nazarene and sit.
I'm interested in how people make these major life changes, particularly in your case, such a major change to a belief system. Did you get positive or negative response from people other than whom you've spoken of already?
Well, I can honestly tell you, I hate to have to tell you this, but it's the truth. How many people do you suppose I have convinced to become a Calvinist in the last 70 years?
I don't know.
Zero.
Hmm.
I've never succeeded in any. All my old Nazarenes, my friend Bill Kearns, he's still alive. He's still Arminian. He's still Arminian. And I just gave up. But let me just say that I eventually decided not to stay at Trevecca. And I figured I didn't have any future with the Nazarenes. And my grandmother took the car back. And I don't blame her. And my father, who was a godly man, actually said, RT, you've broken with God. I said, Dad, I'm closer to God than ever. Because what happened, Kent, in the next few months, I began to have visions. I'd never had a vision in my life. I mean, open visions. And I knew that God was going to use me. I knew that God was going to use me all over the world. And my dad said, when? Well, I said, 1 year from now. That was in 1956. A year later, I wasn't even in the ministry. 5 years later, I was working as a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman. Nobody would put any money on my future. There was no evidence that God was with me at all, because the Nazarenes didn't want me because of my Calvinism. The Calvinists were afraid of me because they were cessationists, and this kind of thing doesn't happen today. And so I said, well, it happened to me. Oh, no, that can't happen. God doesn't do that. And so I was in no man's land. And so is that enough for you? Want to know
Yeah,
that
what emotions did you feel when you were out selling vacuums and door to door and you had this call of God?
it was
What was going on the inside?
oh, it hurt. See, what I didn't tell you, and I should tell you, is that I didn't know how to handle money. My father did something he should have, maybe he shouldn't have done. He's sorry he did it. But he said, son, if you're going to live here, you're going to have to pay rent. And so I had to get a job. And now that I had a job, I had to buy clothes. And before I knew it, I was deep in debt. And uh, because I was deep in debt, now I couldn't pastor a church because I needed to get out of debt. And in the meantime, uh, I went to Olivet Nazarene College. I decided maybe I should get my degree. And I went to Olivet, which is in Kankakee, Illinois, near Chicago. That's where I met Louise. And I married Louise, but I was in debt, and I probably should have waited, but I thought Jesus was coming any day, and I'd waited a long time, and so we got married, and but now I couldn't pastor, and I had to get a job and selling vacuum cleaners. Uh,
Yeah, I'm interested in how you got from there into your doctoral program.
well, a lot happened. Let's see. First of all, I should tell you I had visions. I'll tell you, I'll tell as many as you want me to, but I'll tell you one of them. I, I was, it was in the spring of 1956. I couldn't tell you. I didn't keep a diary in those days. Well, it was January, February, March, April, but I had a vision of seeing a church with windows on the right, but no windows on the left. There were theater-like seats, maybe seated 100 people, aisle in between the pews, and I saw my father walking down the center aisle and came to the front and turned back. He was wearing a mint green suit. That was the vision. Well, it was a small church, and I thought, well, that's not going to be fun. I thought I was going to have a ministry to go around the world. In the meantime, I had other visions that were fulfilled. I could go into detail if you like, but in the meantime, Louise and I got married. I eventually got out of debt, and I was invited to preach in this church in Ohio. And I had a feeling originally that this vision was going to be in Ohio. Well, a church in Carlisle, Ohio, which would be about 50 miles north of Cincinnati, asked me to come and preach for them. And it was a building, uh, theater like seats, windows on the right, no windows on the left, center aisle. And I thought, this sure looks like the vision. They called me to be their pastor. So I go now. I'm now out of debt. And Louise and I, that would have been in 1960. We've been married a couple years. And my father, 150 miles away in Ashland, Kentucky, phoned me and said, son, coming to hear you preach Sunday. I said, good, come on, look forward to that. I said to Louise when I hung up the phone, when he comes, he will be wearing a mint green suit.
Mm.
Came on a Saturday. The mint green suit was on a hanger. And he said, hang this and I'll wear it tomorrow. So the next day, he's wearing it. I'm determined not to make it happen. I thought, I don't know how it's going to happen. And the service was over and the vision was unfulfilled. And then I looked, and here comes my father walking down the center aisle, comes to the front, turns, and that was the end of the vision. Why? Whatever was the reason for me to have a vision like that? I think I know. That church rejected me. After a year and a half, I had to leave. They didn't like my theology. Uh, they shouldn't have called me. But anyway, I was a Calvinist, and they were Arminian, and they didn't want me. Why the vision? It let me know I was in God's will. It let me know I was in God's will. And then I come back. We were living in Florida at the time. And then an old friend becomes pastor of a Baptist church in Hallandale, Florida. And we're living in Fort Lauderdale. And he asked me to be his associate minister. Okay, well, I still had to sell vacuum cleaners, but I was, because he didn't pay me anything. And then a church in Fort Lauderdale became vacant, and I was now getting to be known with Southern Baptists. And to fast forward, I became the pastor of the Lauderdale Matters Baptist Church in Fort Lauderdale.
Mm.
And but I hadn't been to seminary, and I felt as I was getting older, I will regret it if I don't go to seminary. So I did. So I go to Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And those were the days when that seminary was very, very liberal. Won't go into all the detail unless you want me to, but I did well academically. They said, or the registrar told me, that I had the highest academic record in their history. And my professors said, RT, you ought to go to Oxford in England. They recommended me, and I ended up going to Oxford, and I do the DPhil, they call it, PhD in Cambridge. Oxford, they're snobs. They have to be different. They call it DPhil. And there, I'm invited to preach at Westminster Chapel in London. And at the end of the day, I'm fast forwarding. There are details that you don't want to know about. I don't think you do. And at the end of the day, the deacons asked to see me in the vestry. I said, am I in trouble? They said, no, we want you to stay. They had been without a minister for 3 years. Well, they called me, and that's how I got there. But there's more.
Well, this is fantastic. So, when you made the transition from the United States to Europe, what what did you feel there? What was the emotions and the situations?
Well, what I didn't know that I know now, and the English will forgive me for this, because some of them will probably see this. I realized after I got there that the British don't like Americans. I mean, just the fact. I never will forget the first day I'm at Oxford where we rent this house. I go to this newsagent, and I said, "Boy, it's wonderful. This is a beautiful day." And they just looked at me kind of funny, and I could think, "Uh-oh, they don't like me." My American accent just turned them right off, and I just bought the newspaper and went back home. But that was my introduction, and the possibility of my becoming a minister of Westminster Chapel, no chance. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you something. If they had invited me to preach the first week I was in England, they would have never had me back.
Hmm.
But I'd been there 3 years, and now my fell. I'm getting it, and I've passed, and we're going back to America. We actually uh, plan to go back to America. My son's new bicycle, clothes, books, souvenirs, sent back to America. And then Westminster Chapel asked me to be their minister. And what is another story, which you'll find interesting, Martin Lloyd Jones, who eventually became my chief mentor, knew me well. We were friends the whole time I was at Oxford, but he never heard me preach. People assume he put me there. He did, but let me tell you the background. He didn't know that I was going to be asked to preach at Westminster Chapel, but the main deacon phoned him and said, we've been told we should have an RT Kendall. Do you know anything about him? And Lloyd Jones said, because they've told me this, the deacons said, oh, yeah, theologian, you know, but uh, have him once. It'll be, I'll have him. Well, they had me. At the end of the day, they wanted me to stay. So Lloyd Jones phones me and says, whatever did you do? I said, well, all I know is they asked me to come. Well, later on, he begged me. He said, you need to go there, stay for 6 months. And I said, well, they're going to want me to stay, and I'm not going to. He said, I've told them that you won't stay. And so what happened? I agreed to stay 6 months. The second Sunday I was there, Lloyd Jones slipped in and sat on the back row behind a post. I saw him. He tried to keep me from seeing him, and he heard my sermon on Jonah. I was preaching through Jonah, and that night the phone rang at 11 o'clock at night. Lloyd Jones was a nocturnal. He didn't go to bed early, and I did. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and the phone rang, and Lloyd Jones' opening words, verbatim, "You're a preacher. You're a born
Wow.
preacher." He said, "Your place is not in the university. Your place is in a pulpit." Well, it turns out that Lloyd Jones spread that word all over. And
Hmm.
then in the time, they asked to vote on me, and he got 96% of the vote, 96%. And Lloyd Jones said, "That's a bigger vote than I would have got. That's a bigger vote than G. Campbell Morgan would have got." And so I said, "You think I should stay?" "Absolutely." And
Wow.
so he later boasts, "I alone put you in that pulpit." And that's true, because they all knew I was doctor's chosen. Uh, and so he did put me there, but he's not the one that invited me at first. So it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I find that in people making a life trajectory change, God seems to bring along a key person. And did you have continued relationship with Dr. Martin Lloyd Jones as a key person in your life?
We were like father and son. The truth is, the truth is that while I was at Oxford, you see, I didn't tell you that while I was at Oxford, there was a Southern Baptist church nearby in Oxfordshire, at Lower Hayford, made up of U.S. airmen, because the Upper Hayford Air Force Base was there, and it was a Southern Baptist church of about 100, and they asked me to be their pastor. So the whole time I was in Oxford, I didn't know this. I didn't even know how I could do it financially. It was wonderful. I didn't even know there was started to say Nazarene, a Baptist church there. And so they invited me to be their pastor. I invited Lloyd Jones to preach for me. He preached for me in that Southern Baptist church 3 years in a row.
Wow.
And he and Mrs. Lloyd Jones would go with Louise and me to Oxford to see a Shakespeare play. We were real good friends even then. But the whole time, he thought I was just an academic going to be a professor. He never heard me preach. And that's what surprised him. So now that I've accepted, he said to me, "My door is open to you every Thursday for 4 years." I would go to his house at 11 o'clock. Mrs. Lloyd Jones would make us coffee, and we would eat Kit Kats. And I would go over my sermon I was going to preach the following weekend. And I would say, Kent, and this will sound like boasting, but it's not. You will see that it's not really boasting. I'm stating a fact. I think I am the most blessed preacher in the history of the church to have an Oxford education and Martin Lloyd Jones as a mentor. He would go over every sermon, everything I would preach for those 4 years on Thursdays, 2 hours every week. I'd go there often and more. I'd go there on a Sunday night after church. I was there all. I was in and out of his house.
Fantastic. What did you write about in your work at Oxford?
Oh, my thesis was entitled "The Nature of Saving Faith from William Perkins to the Westminster Assembly." And then it was chosen by Oxford University Press to be a permanent book, and we called it Calvin and English Calvinism. And so I did my whole thesis on John Calvin and the English Puritans, in which I showed that Calvin's successor was a man by the name of Theodore Beza, who went beyond Calvin in his doctrine of predestination, and the Puritans followed Beza and called themselves Calvinists, but they weren't really. And my thesis showed that the English Puritans really departed from Calvin. The Calvin actually believed that Jesus died for everybody, whereas Theodore Beza said he died only for the elect. And so what became known as five-point Calvinism didn't really come from John Calvin. But you see, all the Calvinists today have not forgiven me for that. They won't agree. and all I can say is when we get to heaven, I'll let Calvin vindicate me. But those
Yeah.
who, oh, I'll tell you who vindicated me. Martin Lloyd-Jones. He read my thesis, and then he said, "You've got me to reading Calvin." He said, "Listen to this quote. You don't even use this in your book." I said, "I know about it, but I had to limit my uh, uh, thesis to under 100,000 words. I didn't have room for that." He said, "Oh, you need to get that in there." I said, "There's not room." Anyway, he said, "You could prove your thesis to the hilt." But a lot of the Calvinists in England never forgave me. Some agreed with me, some didn't. And that's another long story that would bore you.
Now, in this process of pastoring, somehow it switched to where now you're known as an author. How did that transformation take place?
Well, I told you when I first went there, I preached on Jonah.
Hmm.
Well, the leading publisher in Britain, Hodder and Stoughton, the main man there, his name was Edward England. And he came to see me after I'd been there for, oh, 3 months. And he said, "We want to publish you." He said, "Have you got anything?" I said, "Only my sermons on Jonah." He said, "We'll take them." I said, "How do you know you're not making a mistake?" He said, "We don't make mistakes." So he, he did my book, Jonah. Then he did another book, and then another. And I've probably done 10 or 15 books with Hodder and Stoughton. And I haven't counted them. Then other publisher in Scotland did a bunch of my books. I've got 3 or 4 publishers in England and Britain. A lot of my books were sermons originally, and then about half of them I would just sit at the typewriter. And I just finished a sermon last week called "Doctrines of Demons."
I'm looking at these biblically where people made a major life change. And so, like David before Goliath or after Goliath, or David before Psalm 51, after Psalm 51. And your book, Their Finest Hour, has several people who've made major life changes in the scripture. Do you have a favorite from Their Finest Hour?
Yeah, David. Yeah, I think a lot of people, if you see what I've done in that book, I actually chose 35 characters, but my favorite is David. Many people, if you were to ask them, what do you think was David's finest hour? They would say when he killed Goliath. I said, no, your finest hour is when you do something that nobody would think would make any difference, and you're doing it only for God. You see, when David killed Goliath, everybody knew about it, and he became a hero. Uh, David's finest hour, in my opinion, was when Absalom stole the throne from him. And David now is on his way. He doesn't know where he's going. He's finished. He knows, however, that God is dealing with him because of his sin of adultery and murder. And Nathan the prophet had said to David, "The sword will not leave your house." And so things happen in the life of David. And when Absalom stole the throne, he knew this was God dealing with him. But then as he's leaving now, he's barefoot. He's got a few followers. They're all crying. He crosses the brook Kidron. And lo and behold, there is Zadok, the high priest, with Abiathar, another one, and they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant to follow David. Oh, David knew what they were doing because the Ark of the Covenant had such prestige in Israel that this would send a signal that God is with David. And you better not follow Absalom, you better follow David. David knew what Zadok was trying to do is to keep David and for him to know that by having the ark on his side, it's a slam dunk. He can have the throne right back. And David said no. He said to Zadok, take the ark back. If God wants me to have the throne, he can make it happen. I'm not going to lift a finger. And this was his finest hour when he could have made things happen and used the prestige of the ark, and he wouldn't. And that to me was David's finest hour. And what I've done with that book is picked 30 people, and I choose what I think was their finest hour. People that read it may say, oh, I think there's a better example. That's, I could expect that.
Yeah.
Uh,
You mentioned David's finest hour. And what do you take from his finest hour and making that change in his life to your life today?
my life verse goes back to when I was 20 years old, and I've told you about the visions. What I haven't told you is that my mentor at that time, this is before I met Martin Lloyd Jones, would quote John 5:44 to me and all the time, and that eventually gripped me, and it became my life verse, where Jesus said to the Pharisees who didn't believe in him, how can you believe, who receive honor one of another, and seek not the honor that comes from God only? And I saw that the reason the Pharisees missed their Messiah is because they were more concerned about what people thought and didn't care about what God thought. But that verse gripped me, and I haven't always come up to this standard because it's a pretty high standard to live only for the honor of God. But I've wanted to, I've sought to, and I've always had it before me. And so all my life now, I would say for the last, honestly, 70 years, I have sought to be led by what brings honor to God and not what people think. So that I can honestly tell you that I have wanted more than anything in the world to please God.
Yeah, you're the only person who's ever quoted to me that passage. And so I have it marked in my Bible and I reflect on it often. And I appreciate your emphasis on that. What have you learned new about God recently?
It's nothing new, but it's renewed. How he's no respecter of persons, that he's not going to bow and scrape to me because I'm 90 years old, that I have to wait for him. Uh, and all I live for is the fulfillment of a vision that was given to me uh, some 70 years ago that I still wait on. And and so what I'm learning is that I have to wait. And I would have thought at the age of 90, God might say, oh, well, poor boy, you're tired, you're old. I must reward you. He doesn't treat me like that at all. And all I know is what I've learned is that he self pity gets me nowhere. And I have to wait on him. And I don't get any special favors because I'm 90. Um, um, I I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm trying to be as honest as I know how.
It's
Uh,
fabulous that connecting with the timing of God is challenging.
yeah, I thought by now I would have had this vision fulfilled, but all I can say is I'm still alive. I'm still preaching. I mean, next month I go to Shanghai. In January, I go to Seoul, Korea. And 2 weeks later, back to London. And next Easter, I go to uh, Hong Kong. And in February, I go to Qatar in Doha in the middle. In other words, it looks like God isn't finished with me yet, but I haven't seen what I want to see. And I'm hoping, in my lifetime to see it.
Fantastic. Uh, Thank you so much for talking to us about these new curves in your life throughout your history, your autobiography, so to speak. Let's wrap up with what do you think has been your finest hour?
Okay, I can answer that, but I'm not going to give you details that you're going to want to know
Okay.
because I cannot give the details. But all I can tell you is I think, I think my finest hour was when I was in the greatest trial of my whole life. And what happened was very unfair, unjust, and I was betrayed. And I couldn't tell anybody what happened. An old friend by the name of Joseph Tson, spelled Ton, pronounced Tson, who, by the way, died last week.
Oh,
Yeah, died last week. Joseph Tson died. And I talked to him a month ago, but this was while I was at Westminster Chapel. Those 25 years were the best of times, the worst of times. Uh, and I went through the darkest hour when Joseph Tson came to me, and I die 1,000 deaths at the thought if I'd never met him. Oh my. Thank you, Lord, for sending him to me. I told him what happened, expecting him to put his arm around me and say, RT, well, you ought to be angry. Get it out of your system. He looked at me, and I can hear him now. And I did this to him over the phone. I said, Joseph, I put on your accent. You must totally forgive them. You must totally forgive them. I got him to chuckle. I mean, that's not doing his accent just, but
right.
that's what he said. RT, you must forgive them totally. And until you totally forgive them, you will be in chains. Release them, and you will be released. I did it.
Wow.
Changed my life. Never been the same. And if anybody wants to know my secret, because they do, they'll ask that, uh, is I'm a man of prayer. I read the Bible, and I've forgiven everybody. I've I've got a prayer list of 6 people that I pray for every day that are enemies. Now, you're not on it, Kent.
Yeah, thank you.
Yet.
Recently, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and at the public memorial, his wife gave forgiveness to the shooter.
Oh,
What are your thoughts on that?
I was glad to hear that. Uh,
People watching today are considering doing something new with their life. Not necessarily spiritually, not necessarily a conversion experience, but maybe changing careers, maybe leaving the career to go into service of the Master, our Lord Jesus. What advice do you have as we close for people considering the launching of a second curve in their life and ministry?
well, first of all, you probably would not know about my acrostic peace, Peace. I probably had no reason to preach it when I would preach for you in Anchorage, but I have an acrostic that I've been preaching it for 50, 60 years, works all over the world, and people use it. Peace. Ask 5 questions. First, is it providential? Do you have to knock the door down or does the door open? Enemy. What do you think the devil would want you to do? Figure out what you think the devil would want you to do and do the opposite. A, authority. Is it biblical? Anything in the Bible against it? C, confidence. Does it increase or decrease? The more I'm in the will of God, the more confidence I have. And finally, E, ease. In your heart of hearts, what do you feel? To thine own self be true, quote Shakespeare. In other words, you need 5 out of 5. Not one of those is enough just because it's providential. You need all 5. But if you can come up with PEACE, do the things that make for peace, you probably won't mess up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Kendall.